From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. And let's turn to Joe Biden's speech on Friday, the day before the anniversary of January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. Aides are saying this theme is the big Biden comeback. This will be what will unite Democrats, attract independents, and maybe even some Republicans who may not like Biden and his policies, but are worried about what 4 more years of Donald Trump would bring. Let's listen to the president.
I make this sacred pledge to you. The defense, protection, and preservation of American democracy will remain, as it has been, the central cause of my presidency. America, as we begin this election year, we must be clear. Democracy is on the ballot. Your freedom is on the ballot. Trump's mob wasn't a peaceful protest. It was a violent assault. They were insurrectionists, not patriots. They weren't there to uphold the Constitution. They were there to destroy the Constitution. Trump won't do what an American president must do. He refuses to denounce political violence. So hear me clearly. I'll say what Donald Trump won't. Political violence is never, ever acceptable in the United States political system. Never, never, never. It has no place in a democracy, none.
So this is going to be what we're going to hear for the next 10 months. Trump as looming dictator. Yeah, just can't get enough of this. And Trump, of course, saying, no, you're a dictator. I'm not a dictator. You're a dictator because you unleashed the FBI on me and so on and so forth. But what's interesting here, Kim, is one of the elements of this is the fight over January 6th and the history of it. You heard Biden talk about it. It was an assault on democracy. He says we almost lost the country that day. Trump's response has been to try to turn January 6th almost into a kind of patriotic experience. He calls the people charged and convicted of storming the Capitol as hostages, as if they've been captured by Hamas or patriots. He says he'll pardon them. And I think part of his motivation here is because he needs to try to justify how he behaved on January 6th, in particular, not stopping the violence when it started, when he was watching on TV. It's well documented that he sat and watched TV and didn't do anything till about 4 p.m. And that behavior was not popular then or now. So he has to kind of try to rewrite history about what that event was all about. Meanwhile, Biden is trying to wrap it around Trump that day and say that this is who Trump is, and he'll do it again.
Well, neither of them are right, obviously, and it just goes to show what a political football January 6th has become. Donald Trump's behavior that day was appalling. No one can look back at that day and feel happy. It was a dark day. It was a riot, but at the same time, as we have noted on our pages many times, the good news is that the system held the guardrails that we have in our society, in our political structures all along through that period, but also on that day, helped us get through that. Joe Biden's speech, and I just have to say, it was really struck me. It was, I think, the darkest speech he's ever given. It was far darker than anything he gave in 2020. Obviously, he now has January 6th to add to that and to kind of amp it up. But, I went through and looked at the list of words that he used in this, Paul. It was really something. Destroy the Constitution, authoritarian, dictators, Nazis, autocrats, hate, military forces in the street. And he used the term insurrection or insurrectionist 12 times. Notable, too, given the Colorado Supreme Court decision and the Maine decision and the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court has now decided to take up this question as to whether or not Donald Trump was an insurrectionist on that day. So that seems a little bit of engaging, as it were, in the legal fight over this. He has an obvious interest both in doing this because he knows that it really turns a lot of people off Donald Trump, and I get that. But I would note that it also seems that he's doing it because his other campaign pitches, in particular Bidenomics, he doesn't have much to offer the people. So if it looks like the goal here is to go back and suggest that what you'll get is far worse and scary and dangerous. So you may not like everything I'm doing in office, but you can't let that happen.
Yeah. Kyle, I'm listening to the back and forth. I feel for the American public because it's going to be a long 10 months. But I wonder about the political implications of what Biden says. Namely, is this theme going to work? I think he's somewhat hyperbolic about January 6th. There's no question. I don't think we were in danger of losing American democracy. In fact, as Kim said, the guardrails held up pretty well. But the public didn't like that day, and it didn't like the way Trump behaved that day. And I suspect that Trump is more vulnerable here politically to this theme than a lot of the Trump supporters believe and a lot of Republicans believe, because there's a difference of opinion between Republican voters on January 6th and independents and Democrats, of course. But overall, 78% of Americans disapprove of what happened of the people who forced their way into the Capitol, and 52% strongly disapprove, according to a CBS News poll that came out on the weekend. The people who strongly disapprove include 32% of Republicans and 54% of independents. And if they end up voting on this issue as opposed to inflation or as opposed to other things, that will hurt Trump.
It does suggest how politically codependent these two frontrunners are. And we may end up with an election where only Trump could lose to Joe Biden and only Joe Biden could lose to Trump. I agree with you. There's some exaggeration in Biden's remarks. I do think that the institutions held, though the institutions held in part because we had good Republicans in office like Vice President Mike Pence. And I understand why Democrats, A, don't trust Mike Pence, and B, don't trust that someone like Mike Pence would be on the ticket or in the next Trump administration. So that's the argument that Joe Biden is making. And at least politically, it looks like it could be an okay bet. I mean, Trump is still the front runner in the Republican polls. I did get to a Trump rally in Newton, Iowa this weekend, and I was standing outside when they came out and said, the fire marshal has decreed that no more people are allowed into this building. I did tag along with another reporter who had a press pass and get inside, but I did not get close enough to the main event to even see into, I was in an overflow area, so I couldn't even see into the hall or wherever Trump was speaking to estimate the number of people in the crowd. And so from Joe Biden's perspective, I understand why, even though we're in the middle of these Republican primaries, no Republican primary voter or caucus voter has actually had their voice heard yet. I understand why Joe Biden is all zoned in on beating Donald Trump in November, because that looks like the candidate that he is going to face. And that's the candidate that Joe Biden wants to face. Let's be realistic. But it is true also that Republican primary voters could make a different choice. And there's a reason that polls show that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are head to head, one's up, one's down, and Nikki Haley is up by something like 10 or 15 sometimes.
Kim, on that point, do you think that Haley and DeSantis have made a mistake in not trying to say that, in fact, January 6th and Trump's behavior around that day and post the election in 2020 was, in fact, is going to be a real problem for him because it was not the kind of behavior you expect of a president? I understand why they don't want to do that, because they don't want to be seen as going in the direction that Liz Cheney has or Democrats do. But on the other hand, I think it's a real vulnerability for Trump.
Oh, I do too. And I think it has been a big mistake. And interestingly, on Friday, we played a little clip of a voter actually asking DeSantis why he doesn't go after Trump, why he kind of lacks the courage, as it were, to ask some of these questions. Now, I have heard DeSantis voicing some frustration. In an interview that he did at the end of December, he hit Trump on his handling of the virus and explained why he was so frustrated that he wasn't coming to debate and talk about what he viewed as one of the biggest events of the 21st century and why were we not talking about it. And of course, Trump has ducked all of that. And you've had some, softball criticism from Haley, but if they're not going to take this guy on one-on-one, and there are ways to do it, Paul, you don't have to take the side of Jack Smith in Democrats and pile on in terms of the exact criticism that they have done, but to talk more frankly about the liabilities that he has, his temperament, and just to also make that contrast with a new generation, a younger generation of voters, I think would be quite effective. But they are so wary of offending any so-called Trump voter. I find that weird, too, because there's a lot of people who say that right now Trump is their first choice, but say they are open to other candidates. I think they have to be persuaded by those other candidates as to why they would be a better choice. And they're just not hearing that from either Haley or DeSantis.
Yeah, you have to make the case. Voters need to be persuaded, especially when it comes to pulling them off of a man who served one term in the White House already and is in many ways running in the primaries almost as an incumbent.